Morning, everybody. It's DJ NV, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are the Breakfast Club. We have a special guest in the building.
Yes, indeed.
Marianne Williamson. Welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
First of all, I like you already for two reasons. One, you're a Cancer like me.
Mm-hmm.
Your born day is what, July 8th?
July 8th, what's yours?
July 8th.
June 29th.
Uh-huh.
So that means you're sensitive and emotional and you feel everything. Yeah. And I also like you because you want to give $100 million in reparations.
No more than that.
To black people, more than that.
200 to 500 is the number that I sort of landed on.
Woo!
All right, let's talk about it.
How do you plan to do that?
Well, I think that we could have a reparations council or board of trustees, as it were, and the money could be paid out in, let's say, 20 years, 30 years, and it would be paid for projects of economic and educational renewal.
And strictly to the African descendants of
Yes, of course.
Why do you want to do that for black people?
Well, it's interesting you say that for black people. I think it's for America. I think that if you look at the historical arc of race relations between whites and blacks in America, I think, I don't believe that the average American is racist. I don't. But I do think the average American is vastly undereducated or underinformed about the history of race in America. And behind the facts, which too many people don't know, lies such an enormous emotional reality. 2.5 centuries of slavery.
Yes.
Followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence, white supremacy. And when you look at that and you look at the arc of our history, which I think in many, many ways Americans have lost connection to, and you realize what the civil rights movement did accomplish, and yet what has not yet been accomplished. The externalities of segregation were dismantled. The next year, the Voting Rights Act, although that's been chipped away at, and in many ways we're sliding backwards now with mass incarceration, et cetera. But more to the point, at the end of the Civil War, General Sherman promised 40 acres and a mule.
That's right.
And that 40 acres and a mule would have given to a formerly enslaved population the chance to start over. I mean, if you were slaves, you certainly had skill sets, right? So that 40 acres and a mule, think what that would have meant. So most of them did not receive it. Those who did receive it, in most cases, it was taken away. So the economic restitution piece simply was never handled yet. I mean, it's like if you and I have a difficulty in our relationship, it might take more than one conversation, more than one chapter of healing. Yes. And that's how I look at it. I don't want to minimize any of the successes, sacrifices, or struggles of any of our ancestors, black or white, but this is a piece we have not handled yet. And I believe that after 60 years, you had the end of the Civil War, another 100 years before the Civil Rights Movement. Now it's been another, 50, 60 years, and it's time for the next piece. And I believe that that's economic restitution in a way that was never, because the gap was never closed.
Never.
It was never closed, and we're living with the legacies of that. And I think that it would be a great gift to our children.
Let's go back. Let's find out why you want to run for president. Because we didn't even start there. So you're running for president in 2020. Why?
Well, it's interesting. The reparations is only one example of issues where I feel the conversation that dominates our politics does not go deep enough. I mean, we're living in the 21st century now, and people know, maybe some politicians act like they don't know, I think even they do know, that in order to change your life, you have to do more than just address things that are happening on the outside. You have to address psychological realities, spiritual realities, emotional realities, historical realities. Otherwise, you might fix something, but you're not transforming anything. So what's happening with our politics today is that they fix. But all you're doing is fixing something, then somebody else can get in power 2 years later or 4 years later and unfix it.
As we've been seeing happening even today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have to look at the deeper dynamics of what got us to where we are, and there has to be a change inside people.
I've heard you say that before. It can't be a change inside Washington. It has to be a change inside of us.
And in Washington.
Yeah. Not just a change.
Both hands, right. Yeah. An integrative approach to politics. That's just like we have an integrative approach to medicine. This is the political conversation in America stuck in the 1990s somewhere. It's like this is the 21st century, and people have moved forward. People, whether religion, spirituality, recovery, psychotherapy, people know that you have to address issues going on inside yourself. And the American people have become spectators to politics. There are a lot of different parts of our society. There are poets, there are artists, there are philosophers, there are business people, there are scientists, there are educators, there are people in entertainment. And yet people in politics, just one more lane, wields this extraordinary power over people's lives. and they don't tend to be, particularly at this time, the wisest element.
You said on Twitter.
And we can't just let that be anymore because it's too dangerous where they've taken us.
Yeah.
You said on Twitter, Trump looked out and saw a lot of fearful, angry people and thought, wow, we could change the country with that. I look out and saw a lot of decent, loving people and think, wow, we could change the world with that. Game on.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like for you announcing that you were planning to run for president? Because it does disrupt your whole life. It's a huge, obvious commitment, and it affects a lot of people around you. So when you made that decision, what was it in your head that said, you know what, I'm doing it?
My father died in 1995, and every time I see the president on television, it's like I hear my father's spirit going, this must not go unanswered. The choice, you were just talking about the disruption to my life. I prefer that to screaming at the television for the next 2 years. I think we're living in an all-hands-on-deck type of moment. I don't think I feel anything that everybody I know, and I'm sure all of you don't feel, which is people get this is very serious. And all of us are asking, how can I best help? How can my talents, my skill set best be put to use? And I'm trying to answer that call like everybody I know is. And as far as the fact that the president and others have harnessed fear, bigotry, hatred, racism, etc., for political purposes, what has been clear to me for a very long time is in this country and around the world, there are far more lovers than haters. Mm-hmm. But the haters are very convicted, and they're more organized, and they're serious about getting it done.
And very vocal.
That's right.
And they have an agenda.
Mm-hmm. And love needs to have an agenda. Mm-hmm. So conviction is a force multiplier. We need to force multiply love. We need more than just small random acts of kindness. We need huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. So whether it's reparations or any of the other issues I talk about, it's time to get real and get serious and lay it down and stop taking these namby-pamby incremental approaches that will just delay the ultimate
I think
catastrophe.
your phone's going off. Is that your phone?
Oh, I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
that's yours? I
Yeah,
was
that's
like, what?
the
I've
phone.
never heard that chime
Yeah, that's what I said. It must be her phone going off.
Is it in your bag or your coat?
Is that a
You
family member?
I
or anything
guess.
like
I
that that
mean,
you
might
might
want to put it on Do Not
I
Disturb?
of course,
Which one?
I
I don't wanna touch the
apologize.
bag.
Yeah, just take it.
I
You can
wanna get my
touch the
reparations
bag. There's
deserved.
nothing in there that I have to be embarrassed about. I'm so sorry.
No hot sauce?
That's okay.
I'll find it somewhere.
Are you sure it's not in your coat?
Am I what?
Your coat?
Your
maybe?
jacket.
No, it's in
Okay.
here. That much I
That's
know.
the thing about
I'll
having
find
those
it.
big bags. You can never
Oh, she
find your
got it.
phone. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, that's right, because it doesn't
You
have
go back to
pockets. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Are you all good? There you
Okay,
go.
it's cool.
Boom. Want to put it? You got it? You good?
Yeah. No,
There
thank you.
you go.
What a nice
What a
guy.
nice gentleman over there.
Yeah,
Now,
really.
When we talk about reparations, and
Yes.
are we talking about giving individuals checks? Or are we talking about restitution and doing things in communities that will benefit people?
I think that should be for Black America to decide. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it.
Ooh,
So
I like that.
I think that I think the really big deal is the selection of this Reparations Council. And there are some very profound scholars, people like Professor Darity, Ta-Nehisi Coates. There are many people who have done years of work on this. And the issue would be the very important task of choosing the council, the very important task of negotiating the amount, and the stipulation in my mind would be for economic and educational renewal. And then obviously if the United States is going to hand over that kind of money, I'm not saying they should have no input, but it's not for white America to decide those particular issues.
Where's this money coming from? Because there's white people watching this right now saying she is out of her damn mind.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I even want to take it, there are two things that you just said. So where's the money coming from, and also white people saying she's out of her mind. I'd like to speak to both. Which one do you want me to speak to
Both.
first? Okay. So I have, because I'm running for president, I've spent quite a bit of time in Iowa, one of the whitest states in America. I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, one of the whitest states in America. And I get applause every time I talk about this. Because when you actually paint for people the historical picture, the timeline, it's not unreasonable. It's like, wow, yeah, well, we still owe that money. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. We paid in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, which gave money to the surviving the people who had been interned in the Japanese internment camps during World War II. So it's by the 20th century, well, even after the Civil War, given that that 40 acres and a mule was promised, it shouldn't be considered an outrageous idea.
Not at all.
And you have to, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about taking a fearless moral inventory, admitting the exact nature of your character defects. But Catholics go to confession. Jews have Day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This is what I mean about healing on the inside. This is something we need to deal with. You have to get straight with God. You have to make things right. You have to close the gap between who you say you are and how you're behaving. And racism is an original character defect of the United States. And I believe the universe is merciful, but you have to make things right.
I agree with all that, but where's the money going to come from?
Okay, where's the money going to come from? Well, of course, that's what, we're never asked that when they want to have a $2 trillion tax cut for the very wealthiest among us. They never ask that when they want to invade a country. Both of those misadventures were $2 trillion.
They find that money somewhere.
Every bit of money that is put into education, every bit of money that is put into something that is going to unleash the spirit of people is money that is put into your economy. That's where money comes from. Money comes from people being able to be. That should be our economic policy. There's nothing about our current economic system which has anything to do with long-term economic planning. It's a leeching from the future. If you want to see the real entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, go to any kindergarten anywhere in this country. So to me, anything that unleashes that money is going into allowing people to become all they can be. And the more individuals become all they can be, they create more, they produce more, and they spend more. So this is investment.
So basically, y'all find them. Y'all get money for everything else. Y'all can find money for reparations.
Well, but to me, the whole reparations, in my mind, and as I see my candidacy and my campaign and what would be my presidency, is part of a large picture of issues where, yes, it is, among other things, an entirely different vision of where economic good comes from. We have had 40 years of an economic system which was sold to us with the idea that this will lift all boats if you just give all the money to a few people at the top. I think after 40 years, the evidence is in.
It's bullshit.
It has destroyed our middle class. It has led to the largest income inequality since 1929. It has left 40% of Americans truly struggling.
As Van Jones said, black people have a boat, but it's a hole in it. So when the tide rises, the boat doesn't go up.
And many white people do, too. There are more white people actually living in poverty than black people, more black people percentage-wise. So
they didn't go through slavery, though.
Well, obviously, I'm not disagreeing with that. My, reparations is a big piece of that. I'm just saying that the economic decimation of the last 40 years has, it's damaged the American people, and more importantly, it is an undermining of democracy itself. Louis Brandeis, the Supreme Court Justice, late Supreme Court Justice, said, "You can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both." So what we've done, of course, is just remove such large portions of the public treasury into the hands of a very few people that we've basically reverted to an aristocratic system. And in 1776, we repudiated that. We just need to repudiate it again. The American Revolution is an ongoing process in that sense.
Now, Oprah's a great friend of yours.
Yeah, that's when I first heard you on her Super Soul conversation.
Yeah,
so what did she say about you running for president for 2020?
Well, I don't want to, reveal anything that she's ever said to me, but she who is she not supportive of becoming all that they can be? And,
so you have her endorsement?
No, I wouldn't say that. No. She will do what everybody will do, and that's, I'm sure. I mean, true of everybody, all of you. I don't think it's true of me because I'm clear who I want, but everybody else is going to be listening.
Weighing in.
And you have a year to really think deeply and listen to people, and I'm sure she will do what everybody will do, which is in about a year.
What made you decide to run Democrat and not independent?
I ran as an independent when I ran for Congress 4 years ago, because I do have I have my concerns about the dominance of the two parties, et cetera.
You got 13% of the vote that time when you ran independent.
Out of 16 candidates, though. And I do think in that race, I have to say, I think running as an independent, while a principal position was a naive one. However, at this moment, given this president, I wouldn't risk taking 10 votes away from the Democratic nominee in 2020. To me, you can talk about the issues with the political parties. Those are like broken legs and broken arms. But this presidency is like a bullet near the heart. And we have to take care of this. So I'm a Democrat, and I'm in for whomever is the candidate in 2020, whether it's me or anyone else.
So you think
I'm
it's
so full on in.
what Schultz is doing? Like
Pardon?
you think Schultz running as an independent is dangerous for the Democratic Party?
I mean, obviously.
Can a spiritual person be president? Because a lot of people when they vote, I consider myself a spiritual person, not a religious person, but a lot of people when they vote, they do consider their religious values. So could a spiritual person be president?
Well, what you just said is the point. This is a religious nation. If everybody is either religious, spiritual, in recovery, or in psychotherapy gives me a listen, my campaign will be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where this country lives. The political establishment speaks in very corporatized, over-secularized ways that are just sort of disconnected from the heart, disconnected from wisdom. That's not where the American people live.
Do you think that these Democratic candidates are being honest now when they speak about some form of reparations for black people? Because I feel like that's a conversation you started as far as this presidential cycle. You think they're being honest, or is it just a good talking point right now?
I don't think it's an issue of whether or not they're honest. However, when I hear someone talk about race-based policies, that doesn't speak to the cause of the problem. It speaks to the disparity, but it leaves it in a situation where it could just as easily be blamed on you. So that's the problem for me. You can't just treat a symptom, you have to treat the cause. And I think the psychological and emotional and even moral impact of reparations carries with it a level of mea culpa, carries with it an acknowledgement, a national acknowledgement of a debt to be paid, carries spiritual force in that sense. So it's not about dishonest, but this is the way the status quo perpetuates and protects itself. It co-opts disruptive language. So it didn't surprise me.
Why do you think presidential candidates are hesitant to speak about black issues and a specifically black agenda?
That's not for me to, that's for you to ask them.
What about some of the other...
So why are you not scared?
I'm 66 years old. I'm not doing this to do anything other than speak as fiercely and authentically as I can what I believe needs to be said. And I think this country is like a room full, it's like an alcoholic family system where mommy and daddy are so not laying down what's really going on here. And everybody's like this about it. Somebody's got to speak. I have nothing to lose. Just saying what I see. And I feel at this point in my career what I felt for 35 years, which is I'm not saying anything everybody I know isn't saying. I'm just saying it when the microphone is on. And I do think with a lot of the things I talk about, I'm not saying anything those other candidates don't know, but they won't name it. And people might want to ask themselves why that is.
Do you have a specific agenda for black people outside of the reparations thing?
Well, I think that, as we know, many of the issues of Black America have to do with economic issues. And I think that in all of the areas where we need to address, whether it has to do with racial disparity in our criminal justice system, everything from legalizing marijuana to looking at all of the disparities there. Mass incarceration is a huge issue. Our prisons should not be privatized. When I was in college, there were 300,000 people in prison in this country. Now it's over 2 million. Obviously, there's a racial issue there. So anything that has to do with justice, once again, for me, it's about healing America. And anytime, Martin Luther King's comment, right, was anytime there's a threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
What about health care? A lot of people going through it, can't afford health care. People are scared to go to the doctors to get fixed.
Can't afford it. Let me tell you who can't afford health care is the average American. That's who can't afford health care. So when a bunch of people who have health care say, well, we just can't afford to give universal health care, there's your veiled aristocratic system right there. When you, as I not only believe but experience, because I'm around this country a lot, there are too many people living with this chronic economic despair. Too many people, what am I going to do if I get sick? What am I going to do if one of my kids gets sick? How am I going to pay for my kids to go to college? How am I going to pay off these college loans? and how much money. We've all heard recently about the people who are dying because they couldn't afford their insulin. Either this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, or let's stop pretending that we are.
We know
and
it's
just
not,
admit we know that it's not. Therefore, universal health care is what you do, like every other advanced democracy, if in fact your government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Once again, you unleash universal health care. It would be such a sigh of,
Yeah.
so much more productivity, so much more creativity, so much more money in the pockets of people that they're now spending on health care. So the idea of who can't afford it, the people who've been taking the money for the last 40 years would maybe have to give up just a little.
When did you first start using your white privilege to combat prejudice?
I was raised in a home, a very politically conscious home. My father was an immigration lawyer. My father took us to Vietnam in 1965 to show us what war was. In my, I think it was my third book called Healing the Soul of America that came out in 97. In 1997, I was talking about reparations, mass incarceration, wealth inequality. I was raised in the tradition of Tikkun Olam to repair the world, and it's never not been part of who I am.
So you've been a reparations advocate for a long time.
That book came out in 97.
Do you think that's the greatest American travesty? Slavery? What happened to the African slaves that were brought over?
Well, it's certainly our original character defect, but we've picked up another one on the way. So,
which was the other one? What's the other
well,
one?
since World War II, I think militarism has become a character defect. We have a national security agenda, which is based more on preparedness for war than on the goal of waging peace. And after Vietnam, after Iraq, this is another area where I think we have atonement to do. The United States should be leading the world in peace creation. And peace creation, the factors most involved in that are expanding economic opportunities for women, expanding educational opportunities for children, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. But because we have an economic system, we all know we do, where advocacy for short-term profit maximization of huge multinational corporations is placed before advocacy for the well-being of our people and our planet, and the government is little more than a system of legalized bribery, right, at the behest of the system, then if you look at how that plays out in every field, how it plays out in our Defense Department, and this is not the military's fault, but the way it plays out is that huge military contractors, just like President Eisenhower, Republican president, warned us, who had been the Supreme Allied commander in World War II, warned us about the military-industrial complex. So there are huge corporate profits to be made by, for instance, the fact that the United States will, for the sake of a $100 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, even though we know that those arms are being used, that equipment is being used to support the Saudi Arabian war in Yemen, in which tens of thousands of people have starved, including all those children. And Mike Pompeo says, our Secretary of State says, well, we can have strategic partnerships with people who do not share our values. No, we can't. That means you have sacrificed your values. America used to be seen as a moral leader.
Right.
So the point here is that expanding economic opportunities for women, educational opportunities for children, ameliorating unnecessary human suffering would not make any corporate profits. We don't have a covert corporate takeover of the U.S. government. We have an overt corporate takeover of the U.S. government. The man who is now the interim head of our Defense Department was a 30-year executive at Boeing. You know, the guys who had the Environmental Protection Agency, now it's an ex-chemical company exec. Before him, it was an oil company exec. In this administration, the first Secretary of State had been the CEO of Exxon. So I believe when it comes to our international policies, we should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk, because desperate people do desperate things, and desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. But that's true whether it's a corner of the United States, a city with gangs, or a corner of another country with terrorism.
So your administration would be very diverse. Like, as far as, would it be like regular people? Or?
It would be very diverse, but I'm more interested, yes, it needs to be because it should reflect America.
Gotcha.
But more importantly, a diversity of consciousness. You know, you can have a woman who's a patriarchal thinker, and you can, you know, it's got to be more than cosmetic. It's got to be more than what it looks like. It's got to be how it thinks. We need a radical departure from late 20th century economics and politics. This is the 21st century. We need to have the consciousness of a 21st century perspective, which includes diversity, not only of color and ethnicity, but also of worldview.
When you talk about this administration and you see everything that's going on with Donald Trump and people are surrounding him, do you think that the president should be impeached? And do you see that coming?
There are two questions for me. Should he be, and should they do it? Do I believe that, you know, the Senate would not remove him from office? You know, even if the House impeached him, the Senate would not remove him from office, given the Republican acquiescence to his agenda. So the people who are in charge of that decision, Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, have a lot to think about there, and I'm glad it's not my ultimate decision to make.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think so many white women voted for Donald Trump?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I was just going to say, going back to, we had never gotten around to white people not being open to reparations. It's interesting. I don't think whether it has to do with white women voting for Trump or anybody voting for Trump, I think it's important for all of us to realize that Trump did not win because of them. Trump won because of how many of us did not vote. And this is just math. How many people who do not agree with the president did not vote, how many people who do not agree with the president voted for third party. That's just the numbers. And I also, you know, if anybody who thinks that the task is as simple as defeating him at the polls in 2020, I think that's a very naive presupposition.
Right.
Because if all we do is defeat Trump, there are so many people lined up behind him. And they'll just come back in 22 and come back in 24. We need to, you know, when Lincoln talked about a new birth of freedom, something so compelling has to occur within us. And I have to believe that some of those women that you just mentioned would be open, that they feel some disturbance. But if all we do is shame them, shame is an act of emotional violence. So if all we do is talk about how terrible Trump is, they're going to feel made wrong. And I don't think that's going to make them want to vote for the alternative in 20. So I think our task is, the way I look at Trump, this has been an unfortunate episode in American history. We all have to take responsibility, because for many of us, our own chronic disengagement from the political process in many ways led to this. He's an opportunistic infection. Our own immune system, our citizen activism was low, and now we're going to deal with it, and let's move on and create something beautiful for the 21st century.
Charlamagne said something right before you walked in. We were talking about gun control.
Okay.
I want to get your stance on gun control, and I don't know if Charlamagne said if it was accurate, but he said that they just signed something earlier.
Oh no, that happened back in February, I believe, where Donald Trump made it. He eliminated Barack Obama's bill to keep mentally ill people from buying guns.
That was the first thing he did in office. That was the very first thing he did in office, was he overturned the ban. There are places where blind people.
No.
So, yeah.
Now that's
I know. So,
crazy.
But this, I think one of the things that's interesting about this, the conscious on guns and on many issues, the consciousness of the American people is not the problem. The way our democracy is so dysfunctional, even pathological, is the problem. The majority of American people want universal background checks. The majority of the American people want to outlaw bump stocks. And the majority of the American people are at least questioning now this whole issue of whether or not military assault rifles should be made available to civilians. So, and someone told me the other day that for the first time, the NRA report card is not on their website anymore. That is not necessarily a help. So the House has now passed the bill that would include closing those loopholes. We need the Senate also. But when you look at where the American people are, largely because of all the tragedies that have occurred and largely because of the activism of the Parkland students, the American people are in a lot of issues. And that's what I meant about reparations. Why don't we create a politics? And this is how I see my campaign. Why don't you give people the option of doing really noble, good things? Why don't you give people the option? That's what I want my campaign to be. Here's an option where I believe that being true to our democratic and our human values, will actually be the greater win.
Who's your favorite black leader other than MLK?
There was a man I knew named Mickey Leland. You know who Mickey Leland?
I've heard the name.
He was a black congressman. John Conyers was a good friend of mine. I'm sorry about what has happened there. I mean, we all know the famous ones. There's Malcolm X, and there's John Lewis, and there's Frederick Douglass.
What was
I was very fond of Dorothy Heights. Marianne Wright Edelman, I think, is very inspiring for me as a woman. Sojourner Truth, and I knew Coretta Scott King.
You said Mickey Leland first.
He was a congressman.
What was his contribution to?
Well, it was a contribution to my own life. He was a congressman from Houston, where I come from, and Mickey was someone that I knew whose progressivism. He put a lot of pieces together for me about race in America and about progressive politics, and he died. He was a congressman when he died in a plane crash in Africa.
Because I feel like you're one of these white people who do more listening than you do talking. Like you listen to the struggles of other communities, which I think a lot of people don't do enough.
You know, I'm Jewish, and I was brought up to believe that even if they're not doing it to us now, they could at any time. So always be on the side of whoever they're doing it to.
Absolutely. What does your campaign staff look like? Is it?
Oh yeah,
you got black campaign staffers?
My campaign manager is black, and the woman who is heading things in South Carolina is black, and one of the men is on the team in Iowa. Yeah, we're plenty diverse.
Because the idea of reparations sounds great, but how likely is it to happen? Because I don't want my people just voting for you on the hope.
Well, I think that's reasonable. Listen, if you don't get a progressive Senate and House, then probably not very good.
Gotcha.
But Trump is president, so this idea of anyone being able to predict what is possible. Somebody said to me, "What's your strategy?" We're living in the 21st century now. To me, even strategy, the word, comes from this very linear conceptualization of how life operates. To me, there's a power that emanates from a fiercely articulated truth. And America is filled with, this country had abolition. We had the civil rights movement. We had the Civil War. It's not like this country has never done great things. We've just gotten out of the habit of doing great things. Yeah. And I think Americans are ready to do great things again.
And I like the idea of just doing what's right.
Thank you.
Like we have not.
Just do what's right.
Just do what's right.
That's right.
That's the strategy. Do what's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
They put these things
do
on
the right
books,
thing.
But America's never honored the reparations that they even promised us. So I like the fact of just even putting it out there to do what's right.
And I believe, I have faith in the American people. I have faith in the American people. I have faith in, if he has harnessed fear and hatred for political purposes, let's harness love and decency and dignity for political purposes. I give people, every generation should live for more than just itself. Mm-hmm. It should live in honor of our ancestors and devotion to our grandchildren. Americans have lost, partly because there are so many states that don't even teach American civics and history. Too many Americans have lost the through line of what's been before. Mm-hmm. And without that, you don't have a sense of moral responsibility to generations that come after you. But I see it all the time when people do connect the dots, because the dots have been scrambled. But when people do connect the dots, like I said, I get applause for that idea in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I see so much positive energy coming from you. Like, you're so positive, so
cancer,
caring,
bro.
so loving. This
cancer woman. I think men are.
This
What'd
game.
you say?
I said a cancer woman because I think cancer men, I don't know.
We're the same.
Yeah, but this game is so nasty,
be tough
and
if she
Donald
need to be.
Trump is so nasty. Are you ready to fire back as just as nasty, or is it one of those things where whatever he throws at you is I'll pray for him? Like, what can we expect from you in that
respond
way?
with
You know
love.
what Ronald Reagan used to say?
What?
There they go again. It's like what?
We don't want to hear about Ronald
we don't wanna hear
Reagan.
about Ronald
He
Reagan,
put crack
man.
in the black community.
Oh, I'm not in any way. Listen, please don't get me wrong. I'm just talking about how he won.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so this idea that if we're tough enough cowboys, we beat him, it's childish. It's immature.
You're not going to stoop down to that.
I don't think that that's what's going to win.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't believe that's what's going to win.
No, I agree. It ultimately.
what are we talking about here?
He's ultimately going to crash and burn anyway. Like,
We just don't want the country to crash and burn
With him,
Yeah.
absolutely.
do you feel encouraged that there's other female presidential candidates out there?
Well, definitely in terms of the historical narrative, the fact. I mean, this is incredible. But in terms of the larger picture of so many women empowered to do things like running for president, the way I look at it, future generations will look back at our time and go, "The girls did it."
Yeah.
The issue is, let's make sure they can look back and say, "We did it well."
Right. Well, we look forward to you and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
And
Hopefully we'll see you again.
Give them your website so they can donate to your campaign.
Thank you so much, Marianne 2020.
Marianne Williamson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank
And
you.
Don't come back. Don't be a stranger.
Thank you.
I'm
I would
sure we'll
love
see
that.
you again.
All right. It's the
Be
Breakfast
honored.
Club.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Thank you so much.